Gilbert Ventura, a man shadowed by a long and dark criminal past, made a daring escape from a prison in the Dominican Republic. He sought refuge in Panama, where he believed he could fade into the background and continue his life of crime, untouchable by the arm of the law. Ventura enlisted the help of an associate, Alcibiades Mendez, to carry out his sinister plans. Together, they embarked on a spree of unspeakable violence, kidnapping and murdering 5 young people in the country. Gilbert Ventura Cibaleo was born on the 6th of July, 1975, in the Dominican Republic. He arrived in Panama on July 15, 2008, armed with a 3-month tourist visa. However, the allure of sightseeing was the furthest thing from his mind. He was a fugitive, desperately seeking refuge from the long arm of justice in his homeland. Furthermore, his entry into Panama was shrouded in deception. He presented falsified documents identifying himself as Fermin Antonio Tavares Ramirez. These 2 identities were not the only masks he had worn. His criminal history in the Dominican Republic revealed a pattern of deceit, as he had previously used the name Fermin Antonio Tavares to commit crimes. Discovered alongside were 3 more identification cards, each proclaiming Colombian origin: Seferino Rera Cibaleos, Angel Betancourt, and Carlos Alberto Aguirre Valencia. These documents hinted at a substantial criminal history back in the Dominican Republic. His focus, it appeared, was the country's Chinese community. Records showed that back in 2003, he'd allegedly swindled college proprietors out of 8,000 Dominican pesos. He found himself behind bars after his elaborate scheme crumbled, spending several weeks in jail as a result. The ordeal stemmed from an audacious kidnapping back in October of 2004, when he targeted Wani Ho Wan, a Chinese merchant. Disguised as a police officer, he orchestrated the abduction, demanding a ransom of 1.5 million Dominican pesos from the victim's terrified family. A retired military man aided in the crime, tasked with subduing the merchant at gunpoint. Although the merchant was eventually released, he recounted the psychological torment he endured during his captivity, highlighting the absence of physical violence, but emphasizing the immense emotional distress inflicted by his captors. Ultimately, his crimes caught up with him, leading to a sentence of 20 years for his role in the kidnapping. With the constant threat of death no longer looming over him, a man found himself abandoned in a remote, overgrown thicket after being released by his captors. Left without any assistance, he was vulnerable and alone. This man, let's call him Gilbert, had faced arrest and trial. However, his sentence was cut short when he escaped from prison on November the 30th, 2004. For years, he lived in hiding in the Dominican Republic, but the feeling of being constantly hunted by the police never left him. He was always on edge, convinced his capture was imminent. Driven by an unknown motive, he decided to relocate to Panama. Once settled in Panama, Gelberto consistently used the alias Fermin. Under this guise, he opened a bank account and secured a position as a store administrator. Not long after, Gelberto encountered a woman who captured his heart instantly, and they were soon married. During his time at the store, he befriended a man named Alcibiades Mendez, a native of the Dominican Republic. A bond formed between them, and after several months of growing trust, Gilbert approached his friend with a proposition. Gilbert's scheme involved targeting the Chinese community once more, this time in Panama. His plan was to kidnap the children of Chinese businessmen and demand substantial ransoms for their safe return. Gilbert invited his friend to join him in this venture, and the friend readily agreed. However, these were not the initial offenses that Gilbert intended to commit in Panama. He had already brushed with the law, a past checkered with scams and deceit. He managed to avoid prison for one particular offense, thanks to a shady agreement with the very person he had swindled. But deep down, Alcibiades Simendesi, born on the 1st of May, 1968, always harbored a thirst for easy money, forever scheming for the next perfect crime. Sometime after his arrival, on an undisclosed date, he established 2 phone kiosks. He had his share of troubles with the authorities, dodging alimony payments and entangled in various fraudulent schemes, much like Gelberto. Yet somehow, concrete actions against him always seemed to evaporate into thin air. As I mentioned, after a period of hushed conversations and a growing sense of mutual trust, Alcibiades and Gelberto forged a criminal partnership. Their first victim was Yesenia Argelis Liu, the third daughter of the owners of a well-known shop in Lochireri. Yesenia was a driven student at the Technological University, excelling in her studies. From a young age, she harbored a singular dream: to work in the vibrant world of Panamanian television. Balancing her studies with assisting in her parents' shop, she became a familiar and cherished figure among the local shop owners. Unbeknownst to them, two men were meticulously plotting a series of crimes for several months, finally setting their plan in motion on the 20th of October, 2010. As it happened, Yesenia became their first victim. Stepping out of her parents' apartment, perched above their shop, she slid into her car and set off towards the university. It was the break of dawn, and the streets were unusually quiet. To carry out their plan, the kidnappers had acquired a pair of vehicles. One belonged to Al Alcaviades, while the other was a rental. They shadowed the young woman, maintaining their pursuit until they were approximately 1 kilometer from her destination. Alcaviades backed into her car, the impact jolting Yesenia in her seat. He emerged from his vehicle, and she lowered her window, recognizing him instantly. Alcaviades owned a mobile phone business, a venture remarkably similar to her parents' own. This familiarity instilled a sense of trust in Yesenia, a trust that would prove tragically misplaced. Unbeknownst to her, another car had pulled up behind Alcaviades. From it emerged Gelberto, a pistol clutched firmly in his hand. He advanced on Yesenia's car, the cold steel of the weapon glinting menacingly. With a chillingly calm demeanor, Gelberto pointed the gun at Yesenia and forced her to abandon her vehicle and enter his. They departed the scene, transporting her to a rented house nestled in the El Trapiche area. Upon arrival, they confined Yesenia to the bathroom and meticulously recorded their demands. $200,000 for her safe return. The sum was exorbitant. The modest young women could only scrape together $25,000. 2 days after the abduction, on the 22nd of October, Gelberto murdered Yesenia. He had instructed Alcaviades to step outside and set off some fireworks. Upon returning, Alcaviades discovered the horrifying truth. Gelberto had already killed the girl. The fireworks were meant to mask the sound of the gunshots. Afterward, they dug a shallow grave, placed Yesenia's body inside, and began to cover her with earth. After Gelberto tragically took the young woman's life, all contact between the kidnappers and the family vanished. Unaware of the horrifying truth, the family desperately clung to hope, blanketing the neighborhood and beyond with posters of Yesenia, praying for her safe return. Sadly, their efforts yielded no leads. The family shared in interviews that their initial reaction to the first ransom call was disbelief, dismissing it as a cruel prank. But their hope was shattered when they received a recording of the young girl, confirming their worst fears. Tragically, as the months stretched on, they heard nothing more of Yesenia. Following a failed initial attempt, the men struck again after 6 weeks. This time their target was 27-year-old Jan Calianvu, a shop owner. He had arranged to meet with Alcavidados, believing he was going to finalize a deal for some mobile phones that Alcavidados had offered him. The meeting was set to take place at Alcavidados' home, supposedly to complete the purchase, but the offer was nothing more than a cruel ruse. It was all a carefully laid trap, a sinister plot devised by Alcavidados and Gelberto to abduct him. Alcaviades lured him into a car where Gelberto Ventura was waiting. They subdued him with the butt of a gun, tied him up, and gagged him. He was taken to the same house where Yesenia had been murdered. Dragged from the car, they submerged him in a tank of water, ensuring he wouldn't be found. To further avoid suspicion, they hid him in a pit beneath the kitchen floor. He was then coerced into recording a ransom video. This time the demand was steeper, $400,000. Yong's wife, Ana Rosa, managed to scrape together only $83,000. Amidst the tense negotiations, Gelberto agreed to a swap. However, only Ana Rosa held up her end of the bargain. Heavily pregnant with her second child, she carried the ransom to a deserted patch of land. The kidnappers had promised that within hours, her husband would be freed, returned to his loving family. The woman waited, hope dwindling with each passing moment. Unbeknownst to her, Yong Leon Wu was already dead. The men had employed the same grim tactics as with Yesenia, a firework to mask the sound of gunshots, the burial in an unmarked grave. A woman was left waiting for her husband, but he never came home. Emboldened by their successful kidnapping, the criminals split the ransom. But it wasn't enough. they craved more. A new plot began to form. Their next target, 19-year-old Sami Zen Chen, the eldest of three sons of the well-known businessman Vlachu Reri. The two men began to stalk the young man, but they were clumsy in their surveillance, and their presence started to attract attention. On September 6, 2011, a concerned citizen alerted the authorities about unfamiliar individuals in the neighborhood. Law enforcement officers responded swiftly to the tip, apprehending the suspected individuals. However, lacking sufficient grounds for detention, they were released. Contrary to expectations, the police intervention failed to deter the criminals. The following day, they replicated the same pattern of actions as they had with Assini. In the early hours of the morning, they deliberately collided with Sami's vehicle as he was traveling along the Panamanian highway. The plan went awry. The young man wasn't alone. He was accompanied by his girlfriend, Georgina Dahl Carmen Lee, and his childhood friend, Joel Moriceo Luvonga, with whom he had journeyed through both high school and university. Georgina, an aspiring engineer, had been Sami's girlfriend for 11 months. Though the kidnappers were taken by surprise, they pressed on. The men bound the three young people, taped their mouths shut, and brandishing two pistols, forced them into their car. They were transported to the house, the grim scene of the first two murders. The plan was familiar. Gelberto would charm the family, extracting their wealth, while Alcibiades would guard the three captives. But this operation was different, tainted by a sense of unease. 3 prisoners against a single guard. The odds sparked a desperate hope of escape. Sami made the first move, a daring break for freedom. Alcibiades reacted swiftly, plunging a knife into his leg. Tragedy struck swiftly, claiming the young man's life as he succumbed to blood loss following a premature demise. His girlfriend Georgina fared no better. She was buried alive in the same grave, alongside him, a cruel twist of fate. Upon learning of this harrowing turn of events, Gelberto resolved that his best course of action was to utilize Joel, demanding a ransom. However, in a bizarre twist, they chose not to seek restitution from Joel's family, but instead targeted the family of Sami. After recording a message for his loved ones, he too was buried alive alongside his friends. The Sami family, however, refused to meet the ransom demands. Initially, Gelberto demanded $4 million, eventually dropping the figure to $160,000. Sami's father revealed he ultimately refused to pay anything, as the kidnappers wouldn't provide proof his son was still alive. This led him to believe Sami was already dead, and he ceased all negotiations. The kidnappers revealed a crucial piece of information. They instructed the man to leave the ransom money in the wastelands, near a cluster of red bags. Driven by desperation, Sami's father visited local stores, inquiring if anyone had purchased an unusual quantity of red bags. His persistence paid off when he obtained security footage from one store. The video showed a man buying the very red bags he sought. He immediately recognized the figure on the screen. Alcibiades Mendez, a man well known to Sami's father, found himself in deep trouble. After the abducted boy's family identified him as the perpetrator, they promptly alerted the police. The officers swiftly apprehended Alcibiades at the residence of his former partner, Inés Torres. However, their accomplice, Gelberto Ventura, had already fled the country. Under pressure, Alcibiades confessed everything, providing a detailed account of all the crimes he and his accomplice had committed. He also revealed the locations of the bodies of the abducted young people, allowing the Podum police to find them. Forensic examination determined that Yesenia and Yonkleombu had died from gunshot wounds to the head. Sami perished from a wound to the femoral vein, resulting in severe blood loss. His girlfriend Georgina and friend Joel suffocated to death, having been buried alive. Alcibiades never denied his involvement in what happened and even apologized to all those who suffered. Gelberto Ventura, having fled Panama, found his freedom short-lived. Just 6 weeks after his accomplice was apprehended, he too was captured, his attempt at evasion ending in his native Dominican Republic. Desperate to remain undetected, Ventura resorted to extreme measures. He dyed his hair an outlandish color, a superficial disguise intended to conceal his identity. More drastically, when apprehended, authorities discovered numerous scars marring his fingertips. It is believed he inflicted these wounds upon himself, a desperate attempt to obliterate his fingerprints and thwart identification through biometric databases. Following Gilbert's capture, The Dominican Republic's authorities stipulated that his extradition would only occur if Panamanian officials pledged not to impose a sentence exceeding 30 years, the maximum penalty within Dominican jurisdiction. Eventually, both nations came to terms, leading to Gilbert's transfer to Panama for trial. In stark contrast to Viades, Gilbert y Ventura consistently denied involvement in the crimes, asserting that Panamanian military personnel were the true culprits. In addition to these two individuals, several others were apprehended for receiving funds obtained during the second kidnapping. Among them were Enes Torres, Viades' former girlfriend, Dalmira Torres, Enes's sister, and the man's stepdaughter. They were all entangled in heinous crimes, their hands stained with the illicit act of money laundering. At the crime scene, investigators unearthed grim evidence: restraints, spent bullet casings, and a scattering of $100 bills. The investigation crawled at a snail's pace. In September of 2015, 4 years after the bodies were discovered and with the investigation stalled, the Chinese community held a mass to commemorate the victims. The president of the Chinese Association of Panama declared that they felt betrayed by the authorities, who had promised a thorough and swift investigation, yet years had passed with no resolution in sight. The aftermath of tragedy can be devastating, leaving deep scars on families. Some relatives of the victims were forced to sell their businesses, while others struggled with health issues and turned to alcohol as a way to cope with the pain. Meanwhile, Gilbert Ventura Ceballos proved to be an elusive figure, determined to evade justice. Having already escaped from a prison in the Dominican Republic, he plotted another daring getaway in Panama. In December of 2016, during a supposed meeting with his lawyer, Ceballos made his escape, cleverly disguised as a woman. The circumstances surrounding the escape raised questions. Ceballos was held in a maximum security prison, yet the warden inexplicably requested his transfer to a lower security facility for the meeting. Based on surveillance footage and testimonies from individuals working at the prison, both the attorney and Gelberto entered the kitchen area, where the accused was able to change his clothes. He donned a wig and women's attire, then calmly walked out of the prison facility. Following the escape, a reward of $50,000 was offered and several operations were conducted. The man's alleged attorney was apprehended for her involvement in the escape. According to the testimonies, the prisoner offered her $25,000, of which $10,000 were given to her to facilitate the arrangements. To break free, he needed a car for hire, a wig and women's clothes, and to bribe both a national police officer and a prison guard. The plan? To sneak into the kitchen and out of the prison. In June of 2017, while Gelberto Ventura was still at large, the initial hearings in the case of the kidnapping and murder of 5 young individuals began. During these hearings, Loquiviado Mendez apologized to the families and the people of Panama. He claimed innocence in the killings, stating that the conflict was unplanned and that Gelberto was the one responsible for the first 2 victims' deaths and the live burial of the final 2. Loquiviado further implicated Gelberto as the mastermind, alleging that he orchestrated everything from communicating with the families to selecting the kidnapping victims, while he, Loquiviado, was merely a pawn. 2 months into the hearings in September of that year, Gelberto Ventura was finally apprehended. He attended the hearings where he denied any involvement in the crimes. On June 22, 2018, the wheels of justice finally turned. The court handed down a 50-year sentence to Gelberto Ventura, Loquiviado Mendez for the kidnapping and premeditated murder of 5 young individuals. The women implicated as accomplices in this dark chapter also faced the severity of the law, each receiving a 50-year sentence. Adding to his transgressions, Gelberto Ventura Ceballos incurred an additional 5-year term for escaping custody and conspiring to commit a crime. It is worth recalling that Panama and the Dominican Republic had an agreement capping his prison time at 30 years. As a result, his initial 50-year sentence was commuted. But the story of Gelberto Ventura was far from over. On February 4, 2020, he once again vanished from a Panamanian prison. It marked the 3rd time he'd escaped, counting his flight from the Dominican Republic. Once again, accomplices from within the prison walls aided his escape. At least 13 guards were believed to have been involved, their actions seemingly captured on security cameras during the breakout. However, Gelberto Ventura Ceballos' freedom was short-lived. He was apprehended 9 days later, on February 13. The murderer was then transported back to Panama by helicopter, under heavy security. Upon arriving in the nation's capital, he was taken to the National Police Headquarters in Ancon. There, he received medical attention for signs of dehydration, after which he was transferred to prison. Notably, this second escape led to the resignation of the security minister and the dismissal of a government minister. Indeed, the case of Gelberto Ventura Ceballos reveals numerous inconsistencies in police actions. Representatives of the Chinese community in Panama have stated that numerous leads were provided, yet authorities took no action. During the abduction of Yang, the second victim, his phone's GPS was active, allowing his wife to track his location in real time. She immediately shared this crucial information with the authorities, but, to her dismay, they seemed to disregard the urgency of the situation. Ultimately, these two individuals heartlessly took the lives of 5 young people, all for financial gain. Even while incarcerated, Gelberto Ventura sought to further capitalize on his heinous acts by attempting to publish a book detailing his crimes. Okay, here's the rewritten, formatted, and narrative-style version in English, keeping roughly the same length and focusing on a more engaging delivery. And so, as our journey together draws near to its close, I hope this glimpse into the world we've explored today sparks your imagination and perhaps even inspires you to delve deeper. Remember the stories we uncovered, the ideas we pondered. May they continue to resonate within you long after this moment. May your journey continue with joy,